My name's Mindy Garrett. I wrote a book titled Sacred Light, My Journey from Mormon to Mystic. On this channel, I've been sharing parts of that book, parts of my story, my journey out of the Mormon Church and on to my shamanic spiritual path. This topic today comes from my book as well. And it's the chapter titled Sexual Sovereignty. I've already done a video titled Like a Virgin, talking about how the Mormon Church messes with the sexuality of the youth of the church. This topic today is talking about how the Mormon Church continues that trend with its adult members and its rules and regulations around sex. So, especially if you've grown up in the Mormon Church, which my husband and I both were raised members of the church. So me, more than him, was instilled with a lot of fear, shame, guilt around the subject of sex. My husband I was raised more strict in the church, and he was raised more gray or neutral in the church. So we had very different experiences growing up, the messages that we received around sexuality. So we are sexually sovereign beings. The church tries to exercise authority over all of the members, and especially around sexuality. Just because you're married doesn't mean you get out of having hard conversations with a bishop. They might have changed that some since I've left, but sexuality I view as a sacred, mystical, spiritual, ancient practice that connects us not only to our partner or to ourself, but to Source and God, Creator, however you want to express the idea of a power greater than yourself. So there really is no outlet for the Mormon youth to explore their sexuality in healthy ways, or even to talk about sexuality. It is such a taboo subject. But self-knowledge is a very powerful thing, especially for women, understanding their anatomy, understanding what feels good, what doesn't, and what boundaries they want to set. The container of the church does not do well for our youth exploring that subject of sexuality. And then you get married and if you've been two good Mormons and you have not done anything, then you're just thrown into this new world of sexuality. But it still is not anything goes in the bedroom. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. So sexual energy is vital life force energy that is, within everyone. And Tantra is one of the ways that you can learn to control or use that life force energy, not just for sexual activities, but for other areas in your life, because it is the energy of creation. So it's to have control over that power, which the church tries to do, is another just way that it mind controls the members of the church. If they can control their sexuality, they're controlling their life force energy, their creative energy, and that's a powerful thing. There's a book that I wanted to quote from. It's called Tantra, the Key to Sexual Powers. And it's talking about tantric sex. Tantric sex is the ancient key to sexual and psychic power, attained through a set of rituals, enabling you to reach new heights of sexual pleasure and tap into your sexual energy for creative use in other areas of your life. You are in your most powerful state of consciousness and subconscious concentration during a sexual union, which also connects you with the superconscious mind, making that a holy trinity within you. So Tantra teaches us ways to carry this intense focus of concentration sexually, but then taking that and using it and applying it to other areas in your life. A lot of the really successful people have learned that secret of controlling your sexual energy and using it, putting it to use not just for sexual pleasure, but for success in life, in other things. So Tantra nowadays can have a misconception. Like, you think of a guru and someone trying to teach you techniques or something like that. It is not, you have to just be really careful who you allow into your space for that kind of teaching. There can also be so much abuse around that as well. So discretion, of course, is very important. If you're looking into that, that's not something I think typical Mormons would go down that tantric path. This was something I definitely found out about after leaving the Mormon Church. But I want to continue from that same book. She says, the tantric rituals make it possible to enjoy sex more often, for longer periods of greater pleasure, and more frequently. The more quickly and powerful your sexual energy will regenerate itself in Tantra. In Tantra, all faculties, mental, physical, emotional, are stimulated as strongly as possible and then controlled to bring ever higher pleasure. S3xually had this to say about Tantra sex. In Tantra, coitus, it is a kind of melting with the woman or with the man. It is a kind of relaxation into each other's being, and it is a meditative process because there is no ego, no thought stirs, and time stops. This is a glimpse of God. Tantra is the natural way to God, the normal way to God. The object is to become so completely instinctual, so mindless, that we merge with the ultimate nature, that the woman disappears and becomes a door for the ultimate, and the man disappears and becomes a door for the ultimate. This is the Tantra definition of our sexuality, to return to the absolute innocence and absolute oneness. Sex, in my view, is returning to the 0 point where I'm one with myself, with my partner, with Source. The three of us make a holy trinity, and it's a beautiful experience when you're both on board with the tantric techniques. So tantric sex is an ancient Eastern practice for the purpose of enlightenment. Osho, in the Book of Secrets, explains it like this: God is love is a tantric statement. It means that love is the only reality in our experience which reaches nearest to God, the divine. Why? Because in love, oneness is felt. Bodies remain two, but something beyond the bodies merges and becomes one. And Osho also says in the Book of Secrets about tantric techniques. Tantra could not be tolerated by your so-called saints. They all went against it, because if Tantra succeeds, then all this nonsense which goes on in the name of religion will have to stop. End of quote. So that is the meaning of Tantra for me. It is a way to bring me closer to the divine, to source, to my partner, to my higher self. And I have this references man and woman, but I'm not singling them out. The same thing applies for same-sex couples or by yourself in the tantric practice. So the Mormon Church teaches that, yes, sex brings married couples closer together. The physical union is a good thing, but the most essential function is multiplying and replenishing the earth. Sex is for reproduction more than anything else. This idea of having as many babies as possible, and that should be your number one concern as couples, members of the church. And in the 1970s, they published, there was a lot of men getting vasectomies and taking their power back by saying they didn't want as many children, and women too. And there was a pamphlet put out from the Mormon Medical Ethical Guidelines from Lester Bush Jr. And in that pamphlet it states, quote, "The Lord's commandment imposed upon all Latter-day Saints is to multiply and replenish the earth. Nevertheless, there may be medical conditions related to the health of the mother where sterilization could be justified. Such conditions, rare as they may be, must be determined by a competent medical judgment and in accordance with the laws pertaining hereto. We deplore the fact that members of the church should take such measures to render themselves incapable of further procreation. It is a terrible thing, to say the least, and the more serious offense, the more severe the penalty should be. The question of whether or not a temple recommend should be issued to someone who has had a vasectomy should be determined by the local leaders, based upon their consideration of the underlying circumstances and appraisal of whether or not there has been true repentance." So repentance is needed if you get a vasectomy in the church, or your tubes tied, and your actual temple recommend is in question whether or not you could continue to hold it if you've taken measures to become sterile. That should be none of their business. That means that it is something that the bishop could bring up in a temple recommend interview and ask about. And it makes it also seem like whether or not you go in for a vasectomy or tying your tubes or anything that serious to your body needs to be counseled with the bishop before you do it. That's how intrusive they are into this area of, sexuality and their members. And there is so much shame between even normal married couples and what they can and can't do in the bedroom. In January 5th of 1982, there was an official declaration from the First Presidency of the Church. And in that statement, Spencer W. Kimball, the 12th prophet of the Church, stated, in part, he said this: "The First Presidency has interpreted oral sex as constituting an unnatural, impure, unholy practice. If couples engage in that behavior, then they should not enter the temple unless and until they repent and discontinue any such practices." So I didn't know about that proclamation when I was a temple attending member, but that just means that that's just another notch saying I was never truly worthy to enter the temple, because it was something we practiced and didn't have feelings of guilt about. But had I known about that when I was a true believing Mormon, I absolutely would have, it would have caused me guilt or shame. It wouldn't have stopped me, but it would have just put another notch of guilt. This is a statement by Prophet Harold B. Lee, the 11th prophet of the church. He was also asked about oral sex, and here's what he had to say concerning this sexual activity. I was shocked to have you raise the question about oral lovemaking in the genital area among married couples. Heaven forbid any such degrading activity, which would be abhorrent in the sight of the Lord, for any Latter-day Saint to engage in any kind of perversion of this sacred God-given gift of procreation would be sure to bring down the condemnation of the Lord, whom we would offend were we to engage in any such practice. So, yikes. Oral sex will bring down the condemnation of the Lord. Okay, again, thankful I didn't know about that. So, obviously, the Mormon Church is not an anything goes when it comes to sexuality, even between lawfully married couples. Again, back to Spencer W. Kimball. He has also declared sexual relations in marriage, Sexual relations in marriage are not unrestrained. Even though sex can be an important and satisfactory part of married life, we must remember that life is not destined just for sex. Even marriage does not make proper certain extremes in sexual indulgence. And the Lord's condemnation included secret sexual sins in marriage when he said, "And those who are not pure and have said they were pure shall be destroyed, saith the Lord God." That comes from D&C, Doctrine and Covenants, section 132, verse 52. I'm going to end or break in his quote for a second because Spencer W. Kimball is taking this verse out of context purposely, saying that any sexual sin we can be destroyed for, basically. But this verse specifically was directed to Emma, Joseph Smith's wife, his first wife, when she wanted to take on spiritual husbands, because he was having spiritual wives, right? And concubines, and he's running amok with polygamy. And Emma's like, well, if you can do it, I can do it too. And this whole section 132 in Doctrine and Covenants about polygamy basically was to shut Emma up and to keep her in line, and threatened her with destruction if she were to go off and have polyamorous relationship. But the polygamy was totally justified. So yeah, this section is 132, and Spencer W. Kimball about polygamy, and specifically for Emma Smith, and for Spencer W. Kimball to quote that, to say that all members who deviate in sexual sin, he's taking it out of context and just creating fear. He continues on, saying, if it is unnatural, you just don't do it. That is all. And all the family life should be kept clean and worthy and on a very high plane. There are some people who have said that behind the bedroom door, anything goes. And that is not true. And the Lord would not condone it. So, mutual masturbation, oral sex, anal sex, playing with sex toys, viewing porn together, anything like that might be considered slightly edgy. For Mormons, it's no. It's supposed to be a no. But what's interesting is Utah has one of the highest rates for porn, subscriptions to pornography. Utah leads the way. And there's a reason. And most of those people are Mormons in Utah that are subscribing to porn. And it's because we have this container of Mormonism that doesn't allow for its members to be sexually sovereign. And so then that brings guilt and shame that just continues. And oh my God, sexual abuse. There's so much right now in the media about pedophiles in the Mormon Church and people who are sexually abused, their stories coming out. And it's just the stories about the Mormon Church taking care of hushing these men up and the victims up. And I mean, they're no better than the Catholic Church and the problem they had with the sexual abuse. When you make everything sexual other than a strict, missionary position, and consider it as unholy or impure and an unnatural practice, even though that's not true, it fucks with the minds of the members. And then there you have this need to have to confess to the bishop, and then he gets to judge you and deem whether or not you're still worthy to enter the temple or to hold a calling or to do whatever. This is one big way the church fucks with the minds of the adult members. So let me see. Brene Brown said, so I want to talk about sexual pleasure deepening couples connection. That's why I'm quoting her. I didn't state that. Brene Brown says, I define connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. Giving and receiving are in fact the same when you are living consciously. True love understands this truth, that to give is to receive. So knowing your partner intimately from the inside out and appreciating their intimate thoughts, feelings, emotions, I would go on to say fantasies, desires, that builds a connection, making the partnership stronger and more and better. But we have this environment in the Mormon Church where couples can't really share fantasies or ideas or desires if they're not in this Mormon bubble container of what's okay. If it's anything outside of that the church is deemed unholy or impure, unless you have a really strong, secure relationship, couples aren't going to voice those things with each other. I want to share a story, but I'm not sure if this is the right moment. About connection and myself, my husband. So I knew sex toys were like a no-no when it comes down to the church. But after we hadn't been married 10 years yet, so maybe 7 or 8 years of marriage and 3 kids, my husband decided he thought it would be fun to buy me a vibrator. And so I was like, okay, we'll try it. Had never used one before. So this is around 1995. And he purchased this for us to enjoy together. And I did have a little bit of guilt, but not enough to not use it and enjoy it with each other. 5 years later, in 2000, I'm pregnant with baby number 5. And I had had 4 boys in a row, and I desperately wanted my little girl. And Randy had gone to hunt in Alaska for like 2 weeks, And while he was away, I was doing a lot of kind of soul searching. And one of the things that kept coming back to me, my little Mormon mind, because I was very much in this Mormon bubble, was that maybe God will punish me for using this, and maybe I should get rid of it, especially because I want to ask God for this big favor. If he gives me another boy, I'm gonna lose my freaking mind. Like, I knew I had a daughter waiting to come, and I really felt like that I needed to do something to show him my sincerity. So while my husband was away, I decided to throw the vibrator in the garbage and plead with God to forgive me for using that, and to please bless us with our daughter. My Mormon mind really believed that God could punish me by holding back my daughter, giving her to somebody else, and because I had sinned, and I was carrying the guilt of that. I hadn't had an ultrasound yet, so I didn't know if this baby was a boy or a girl, but my inner sense was that it was my girl. It was a daughter, and I wanted very much for her to come into our family. So I threw it away. And then, a few weeks later, we learned, yeah, it was a girl. And so that was one of those stories that kind of my Mormon mind went, okay, church must be true. I had this impression to get rid of this. God blessed me because I did. Even though there's no correlation between the two. Like, now I can look back in a moment of, that daughter is now 24. So it's been a long time since this experience happened. But in the moment, it was very, very real for me. I thought God would punish me for that sin. And so I told myself I made the right decision. And it was a good thing. And I had my daughter, and, all was well. My husband, when I had confessed what I had done, he was like, okay, if you really think that's what you needed to do, okay. But he didn't believe there was any correlation. He didn't believe God was going to punish us for that. But he was raised very gray in the church. He had a very, very different experience than I did. Okay, sex between committed couples can truly express heaven on earth. There's a man named Napoleon Hill. He is an amazing man. He wrote many books. In a book called Think and Grow Rich, he devotes a whole chapter to sexual transmutation, taking sexual energy and transmuting it in other ways in your life to be successful. And I highly recommend that book. He talks about how love and sex in partnership is truly powerful. Love, sex, and romance is a holy trinity in his eyes. I want to read what he says in this book. Love, without question, is life's greatest experience. Love is an emotion with many sides, shades, and colors. But the most intense and burning kind of love is that experienced in the blending of the emotions of love and sex. Marriage is not blessed with the eternal affinity of love, properly balanced and proportioned with sex, cannot be happy ones, and seldom endure. Love alone will not bring happiness in a marriage, nor will sex alone. When these two beautiful emotions are blended, marriage may bring about a state of mind closest to the spiritual the one may ever know on this earthly plane. When the emotion of romance is added to those of love and sex, the obstructions between the finite mind of man and the infinite intelligence are removed. Fortunate is the husband whose wife understands the relationship between the emotions of love, sex, and romance. When motivated by this holy trinity, no form of labor is burdensome, because even the lowliest form of effort takes on a natural labor of love. So love, sex, romance make up this holy trinity, especially in marriage when you're in a committed relationship. I believe sexual intimacy is created at a far deeper spiritual level when you have, when you know that you can talk confidentially, honestly with your partner about all your thoughts and all your feelings, that they can be spoken liberally without fear, guilt, or shame, and with trust that your partner's going to keep that information between the two of you. Surrendering in a partnership, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually as well, helps to open up your conscious communication and will feed each other's spirit and augment a deeper commitment to the relationship. Sexual energy can unite body, mind, and spirit as one, bringing the masculine and feminine energies within us into balance and harmony. Couples should be free to explore and express their miraculous and mystifying sexual desires, needs, and wishes candidly with their partners without feeling remorse or regret or disgrace for their open and honest thoughts regarding sex and their desire for sexual satisfaction. Vulnerability is especially a beautiful thing in marriage, making your bond stronger and more durable by allowing authenticity to blossom. Back to Brené Brown, I wanted to quote her again. She, from her book, The Gifts of Imperfection, she says this about love and vulnerability. We cultivate love when we allow our most vulnerable and powerful selves to be deeply seen and known. And when we honor the spiritual connection that grows from that offering with trust, respect, kindness, and affection. Love is not something we give or get. It is something that we nurture and grow. A connection that can only be cultivated between two people when it exists within each one of them. We can only love others as much as we love ourselves. Shame, blame, disrespect, betrayal, and the withholding of affection damage the roots from which love grows. Love can only survive these injuries if they are acknowledged, healed, and are rare. So you and only you are the source of your love, and the same for your partner. You possess the sacred ability to choose when and how to feel that inner love or when to block it out. Love has always been inside of you like a vast ocean. An infinite supply is at hand. It never diminishes or fades away, and no one can add to your love or take it away, no matter what we were taught to believe. Love must be recognized as the truth of who we are in order to extend it and shine it on others. Being vulnerable is one of the ways to help love grow and nurture that sexual energy within yourself. There's a quote I wanted to speak from. It's called myloveearth.org. Cultivating our sexual sovereignty is a path of empowerment, freedom, and responsibility. It's a path of healing, restoring, and making whole. Cultivating our sexual sovereignty is a path towards accepting ourselves as part of the grand experiment and cycle of life, and existing in the rapture and ecstasy of being alive. Restoring our sexual sovereignty is an integral step in restoring our partnership with life itself. What sexual sovereignty means to me was taking back my sexual power and reclaiming my right to own my sexual desires, my sexual fantasies, wishes, expressions. Sexual sovereignty is a natural progression of my own exotic wisdom when I allow myself to be vulnerable, open, and honest with my desires with my partner. So, after I left the church in 2011, one of the first things I did was go out and buy myself and my husband some fun sex toys, because that guilt, that shame, that restrictions had been lifted. The other thing I discovered after I left the Mormon Church was there is a whole lot of swinging Mormons out there that I had no idea about. Mormons can be pretty wild. I had no idea that stuff was going on in Utah. But after I left the church and started hanging out in some ex-Mormon groups, and my eyes just were opened, and found out, yeah, Mormons actually drink and experiment, and they are not, I was just naive. Let's just put it that way. I was so naive as a Mormon, and tried to do things so by the book. When I went through the temple, I tried to keep myself on track. But as a Mormon, I could not have deviated sexually from the norm. It took lifting the indoctrination off of me before I could open to myself up to Tantra, to find what is holy within myself, and my sexuality, and to embrace it. The other thing I will say before I end is, after I left the church, my husband was still a member, and still believing member, still is to this day, 14 years later. Honestly, one of the biggest reasons that we made it through all the hard times was because we had a really good sexual relationship, and that trumped everything else. Even when we had moments of, separating because things were so hard and things were so intense, especially after my book was published, that was just probably the hardest time in our lives. From 2016 to 2019, my book came out, my father died, and my family of origin shattered with his death and the reading of his will. So, and that was the period of time that we separated for a little bit. We still lived together. We still co-parented and did everything we could for our kids to make it through that hard time. And what kept us from divorcing, honestly, was because we still had a sex life, because we still came together to experience that support and love and vulnerability with one another. It took a lot of time for us to mend all the fences and to figure out how we were going to walk this different spiritual path together. Him as a Mormon, me as a shamanic minister. But we did it. And we did it because we had a foundation, a sexual relationship that actually started, that was our foundation before our life together in the church. We weren't married in the church to begin with. And so, we were only temple attending people for 20 years. And I think starting our marriage outside of the church is what saved our marriage in the end. Yeah. So I'm grateful for my husband for sticking with me and going through those really hard times together and figuring it out. And I don't think we could have done that if we hadn't had this foundation before all the trouble came. It was something we could lean on. And I will say, since leaving the church, my husband has his mind has been opened a little bit more through our sexual discoveries and sexual, I would say maybe experiments and experiences. We've dipped our toe in the waters of Utah's things they had to offer that we did not know about. Let's just put it that way. And it's been kind of fun reclaiming that sexuality. It's also changed as we've gotten older, and that's good too, in my opinion. It's not supposed to be the same yesterday, today, forever. I think our sexuality should grow and change and morph as we do, as we grow and change. So, yeah, there is one last quote from, I'm not going to say where it's from, just found it on the internet, and it says, by fully claiming our sexuality and commanding an embodied authority of this aspect of our lives, our sexuality frees itself from being ruled or formed by external opinions or behaviors, and instead becomes self-validated, self-reflective, and self-actualizing. I love that. And that is how I view my sexuality from here until I die. Probably got 30 more years-ish left on this earth, and I want my sexuality to be enjoyed, celebrated, embraced, and it is free to change and evolve as I do. And same with my husband, because we are sexually sovereign beings, no longer under the control of the church. And yes, he is still a member of the church, but hasn't had a bishop interview in 16, 17 years, and no plans to go back to the bishop for that. His beliefs are his own, as are mine, and we appreciate when those beliefs intersect, and sexuality is one of them that we can agree with. That having an open and vulnerable, honest, trustworthy, intimate relationship with each other, where we can express our desires and wants and fantasies, has been everything. It was what held us together. It was the game changer. And yeah, we probably wouldn't have made it if we hadn't had that foundation to lean on, because it is so hard to leave the Mormon Church, especially when one spouse is in and the other spouse is out. It is not an easy path to walk. And I will say our sexuality and that bond, that connection that we shared with each other, is what made it last. It's what made us be able to weather the storms, because there were many storms from me leaving, many consequences. So yeah, I think that's all I want to say about that. Next time, I'm coming up on the anniversary of my mother's passing. It will be 11 years, and I channeled some messages from her over the past few years that she's been gone, and I want to talk about channeling, because I view the Book of Mormon as channeled. It was a channeled scripture, just like they are now saying the Book of Abraham was channeled, and the Joseph Smith used the papyri that he got as a sounding board, and it was just the inspiration for this channeled message to come through. So I want to talk about channeling next time, on the anniversary probably of my mother's passing, which is on the 8th. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there. Namaste.